Welcome everyone to the Global Conference on the Art and Science of Shamanism. We will explore how this ancient spiritual practice is incredibly relevant today to reclaim inner freedom and to marvel at the beauty of our world and of being human. This event is designed to open up a sacred space for all of us and to access wisdom and compassion for ourselves and for the planet. Here, you're invited to reclaim your birthright, your original power, and to tune into ancient knowledge, remembrance of your ancestors, of your own lineage. It will be an opportunity to transform as we receive the mystical, spiritual wisdom of ancient traditions. I'm Celine Roche. I'm your host for this event. And today I'm very excited to present you with Veronica Goodchild. Thank you so much, Veronica, for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. It's a treat for us. So thank you. And I'm going to share a few words about you because you've done a lot of work. So Veronica Goodchild is a PhD, and she's been a student of shamanism and mysticism for many years. She has studied with various traditions, combining them with her Jungian background as a depth psychologist, teacher, therapist, pilgrimage leader, and author. She finds these three traditions of shamanism, mysticism, and Jung's visionary psychology to have many areas in common that have guided her along her path. In addition to her studies, dreams, and interests, all of those have led Veronica to travel to some of the sacred landscapes of Palestine, Greece, Great Britain, France, Malta, Peru, and Egypt to learn from their mystic stories. In addition to her solo Camino walk, were inspired by the tradition of these cultures. So she's especially interested in how fostering a deep connection with nature, the power of dreaming and sacred journeying leads to the death of soul and spirit. Veronica is a professor emerita at Pacifica Graduate Institute and an affiliate member of the Inter-Regional Society of Jungian Analysts. She is the author of Songlines of the Soul, Pathways to a New Vision for a New Century, and Eros and Chaos, the Sacred Mysteries and Dark Shadows of Love. So Veronica lives in the southwest of France, so we are close neighbor. Thank you so much, Veronica, again for coming to this event today and to participate. And the topic of your interview is going to be about the healing power of vision and nature, where shamanism, mysticism, and Jung's psychology of the dead converge. There's a lot you're going to share today, so we're very excited. Could you first start by telling us how you've become interested in shamanism?
Yes, of course. So this goes back to the mid-80s. And at that point, I was in my 30s, living on the East Coast of the US then, and having my two children. And a friend of mine told me about a woman who did readings, a clairvoyant who was psychic and could read the soul origins and destiny and current situation and offer insights and so on. So I made an appointment, and it turned out that she was a member of an indigenous tribe in New York State. She didn't call herself a shaman, but she was certainly one, as I discovered over time. I think the term she used was wisdom keeper or earth keeper or something like that. So when I met her, the first thing she said was, "Why are you here?" And I was somewhat surprised, as I thought everyone came for a psychic reading. So that's what I said. I said, "I'm here for a psychic reading." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You don't have anything else going on?" At which point I realized that she was already reading me and that she could see what was actually going on. So in fact, I was 4 months pregnant with my second child, so I was hardly showing, especially because it was February and New York, you know, it was chunky winter sweaters that we were all wearing. But I had in fact been concerned because at age 35, which I was then, You were considered almost over the hill for having babies, which seems absurd now, obviously. But my doctor was insisting on me having an amniocentesis, which I was resisting as I recoiled from the idea, frankly, of a needle being put into my tummy, into my baby's floating world and disturbing it. So I had made some appointments for the procedure, but every time I did, there was such a snowstorm, I couldn't make them. So I also felt that this impossibility, like the snowstorm stopping me, meant something. So I told her that story, at which point she simply said, well, would you like to go in and see for yourself how your baby is and ask him or her if this procedure is necessary? And at that time, I was absolutely just shocked and amazed and curious, and I think incredibly relieved all at the same time. So without another thought, I said, yes, I would. So we went into some simple preparations and breathing, nothing special, nothing fancy. And she guided me into the subtle realm of my baby's world. Images came immediately. I could see the soul of my child as a little boy running as fast as he could up and over a hill toward me. Immediately, I could see what a healthy being he was and how much he wanted to incarnate here. It was a profoundly moving experience, as you might imagine. I had no doubt after this that the procedure was indeed unnecessary and the snowstorm block had in fact been meaningful. The shaman went on to tell me things about my own fate, mostly that I was here as a bridge between the old world that was ending and the new world that was coming into being. And also she basically put out the destinies of my own two children, my daughter, who was 2 years older than my son, and she said that they were both already in the new consciousness coming to the planet, and her seeing has in fact been totally accurate. They've both been in the areas and places and that she described. At that time, my daughter was not quite 2, and my son wasn't yet born, which he was in July. This was February. So after this extraordinary experience, I did a lot of work with her, looking at, current issues, clearing karmic patterns at their origin point, intense psycho-spiritual physical work involving journeying, dreaming, visioning. She would recommend healing oils and herbs, and in a community of her students, we also engaged in sweat lodge ceremony and other rituals that honor the earth and reconnect us with our ancestors to help us on our own journeys on this earth. Moreover, with my teacher, I learned about my connection to the Pleiades, and that happened because in mid-May of that year, I became highly activated with energy, and I wondered, frankly, what the hell was going on. So I called her, and she explained to me it was a call, if you like, from the star system Pleiades, because May 16th to the 18th, which exactly was the window where I was having this activation, are the Pleiadian high degree days, so-called, when the veils to that star cluster are thin and contact is facilitated. Those same dates are true in November too, 16th to the 18th in November, May and November. She asked me, and if there was a particular star in that cluster that I felt a particular connection with. And especially she asked me that after I'd been given a kind of secret name in a meditation, which I don't ever use. In fact, 2 years later, there was contact, also in mid-May. And I've written about this in Songlines, my contact experience. And also it was unusual in that there were 4 hours of missing time. And it wasn't until 10 years later, because you couldn't talk about those things then, in 1980, around there, 1918, 7, 8, 9. People knew about it, but of course, because indigenous cultures, that's where their ancestors and their teachers are in indigenous traditions. But so it was only 10 years after that I did a process through a colleague of mine that helped me recover the forgotten time. And that was really amazing. I've written that as well in my Songlines book, What Happened There. Long story short, I was given by these two beings in subtle form, Pleiadian beings, a profound teaching on the nature of our planet. They called it Earth School, and that we were here fundamentally to learn about love. And in fact, they did this energetic work on my heart, which was this experience of just like this whole area of my chest being kind of pulled open, and other insights into the sort of spiritual nature of the universe and how it works, and the invisible structure of it, and everything. It was just extraordinary. So remember, we're still in the 80s here. So
yeah.
she was also a teacher, of course, and one of her teachings was on the galactic timing of unfolding events. And she talked about Earth's ascension process. This is what everybody's talking about now. But I heard about this back in the 80s, and it was about, she would just tell us, like a matter of fact, the Earth's moving into a higher dimensional reality. She talked about the importance of the harmonic convergence as the period from July 87 until December 2012, that 25-year period where Earth was being prepared to decide whether it would in fact become an ascended civilization, a galactic civilization or not, whether we'd been able to tip the scales in the direction of love and wisdom or not. And she said it's not at all a done deal for humans. She said the Earth will do it. Whether we come along or not is completely up to us. So these were teachings that, and on the harmonic convergence, which was just almost like 2 days after my son was born, we were in ceremony and celebrating the sort of kickoff point, the origin point of that whole 25-year period. Yeah. So the journey, was also the decision to become aware that we are star seeds, everybody, effectively, because we're all made of light, we're all made of starlight. Whether you recognize that or not is up to you, effectively, and to recognize that we are moving to a new human energy and consciousness potential as we leave the Piscean era and move toward Aquarius. One of my favorite speakers, John Ryan, talks about this very beautifully. So, and then of course from 2012 to now, various other things have happened. And as we all know, because we can all feel it, there's an increase in this sort of galactic energy coming into the planet, and the huge, massive transformations that are going on in terms of grievous dismantling and terrible tragedies and wars still going on under the old patriarchal order that does not want to seem to go away anytime soon. But anyway, I have Jupiter on my midheaven, so I'm optimistic, and I'm going to stay with that. I think eventually it will happen, but we have to remind ourselves that we're in this planetary initiatory death and rebirth, and that's a very chaotic time and very painful and difficult for a lot of people collectively, but also individually, as people are going through tremendously hard times at the moment, as we know.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting about that 87 to 2012 period was that it was, in fact, in spite of all the disasters, 9/11 and God knows what collapse and all of that, financial collapse. It was also a period where people were having mystical experiences, and of UFO and ET encounters, the crop circle phenomena. And that's why I talk about these things, because these are the sorts of experiences that, both from the Earth point of view with crop circles, but also from the Star Nation people, it's ways that our consciousness is being moved into this multi-dimensional frequency.
Yeah.
And all these things are helping us. They're helping us. They're not doing it for us because we have to choose. But anyway, you can see how here I was, here I was, working and having a young family and being exposed to this extraordinary knowledge. And I was already a psychotherapist. And so increasingly, I just brought these teachings in different ways into my practice. I was full-time practice at that point. Anyway, it's also been a time from the 80s to now that people have been drawn more and more to shamanic traditions, because they tell us what's going on, for one thing, and they help us navigate the energetic changes, consciousness changes that situate our reality between Earth and stars. And we're opening up to this, and we're all becoming mystics. That's what I think. It's a kind of mysticism, but it's not what it was, up and out spiritual. No, it's bringing that knowledge into the body. So it's an embodied mysticism. This is the new mysticism, I think, that's going to come out of this and is coming out of it. Anyway, you can see what a profound introduction to the reality of shamanism this was.
Absolutely.
The shaman is seer, visionary, able to read energy, clairvoyant, a healer of psychological, spiritual, and physical issues, a teacher of esoteric and galactic knowledge, a ceremonialist, one who has a deep connection to Mother Earth, and as the mother of life. We get stuck on, well, my mother didn't do this or the other, but you know what? Indigenous people teach, okay, fair enough, we have to work through those issues, which we do, but your true mother is the earth. That's who provides the abundance. That's who we need to live within her resources, not raping them.
Yeah.
This has to change, obviously. We can't sustain it.
Yeah.
So and the shaman, offers so much to the community, and also to the deepest wisdom in our own souls and bodies. So these mystical influences seeded 36 years ago now, which probably are not even 36, I don't know, have been an ongoing impact in my work, teaching, my writing, as a psychotherapist, and just living my life, so
Beautiful.
That's how I got introduced.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's really inspiring. And could you share about some of your own experiences?
Sure. Yeah. So what I realized was that my experience with my teacher was not the first time I had such experiences. In fact, the first one that I'd like to briefly tell was when I was about 5 or 6 years old, living in England, because I grew up in England. And at that time, my family was living in Sussex. So it was the most amazing thing. And I know this is not unusual. As a therapist, I always used to ask people, did you have any interesting or unusual things that happened in your childhood? And so often it's the case. So my experience was that I was in the garden of our house. It was summer. It was sort of late afternoon. it still felt light, like it wasn't going to be dark for a while, because, you know, in summer, those evenings go on forever in England. But it was 6 o'clock, and that was when we were supposed to, you know, have baths and go to bed. But I resented it. I didn't want to. I hoped nobody would notice, because it was still so light. And I just had this feeling, I've got to stay here. I wanted to stay where I was outside with this atmosphere. So I hope that my parents, you know, won't remember that we're meant to be going inside now. And I remember my father, he was mowing the lawn, but the sound of the motor seems far away, but I could smell the grass. And my mother was gardening. It seemed like she was, you know, I don't know. It was all starting to drift away. And there was this violet wisteria on the outside of our house, which was so beautiful. You call it piscine here, I think, the wisteria. And it just suddenly looked so gorgeous, these blossoms against the sand-colored walls of the house. So, you know, the light was setting on the house, and then everything became very muffled. All the voices became very muffled, and I myself began to dissolve. I felt like I was dissolving. I didn't run. I kept still. Everything was peaceful. And then suddenly this insight came that the light reminds me of another time, another place, a memory of something familiar but very far away. The light is golden. Its softness is breaking through from another world into mine, and everything, suddenly I could see everything bathed in this golden light, you know. And then I suddenly felt at one with the light, and I felt it could see me, and I felt completely at home in that moment. I wasn't a child, I wasn't an adult. I felt like an eternal being, in complete harmony with a story much larger than my own. That was the feeling. Mm-hmm. I knew that I came from that light, and I knew that one day I'd return to it. It was really extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And, you know, much, you know, later on in life, you know, when I remember that experience at 5 or 6, it's totally real. It's as if it's only just happened. But what I think now in my old age is, when I look back at that experience, that was like a blueprint of everything I've been devoted to. It was like, that's what I followed without knowing that I did. So it was like a sort of, yeah, it was like a vision of a blueprint that obviously you work out in specific ways in your life. And of course, you know, descent and return are very common in many myths, as you know. And of course, descent also means descent. Now, I didn't experience that in that, but, you know, life, you're going to experience descents too, of not very pleasant kinds. But that was the very amazingly positive side of it, I think, obviously. Because it's true. Time and again, I've been reminded in my life that that's absolutely true. That's where we come from, and that's what we'll go back to. Anyway, let's see. Another experience I had when I was 18. I went to Palestine, Israel. I just finished school, and my parents said, you know, before university, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to Israel. I was surprised when they said yes. This was 1969. It was not a great time to be in the Middle East. But anyway, I wanted to work on a kibbutz, and they supported it. So, you know, we would work on the kibbutz very early because it was so hot there. And then we'd have a late breakfast, 10 or something, and then the day was free, and we hitchhiked then. Everyone hitchhiked around because it's quite a small country to the sites. And one day I was standing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and I remember again, the sun was going down on the mountains of Tiberias on the other side, and I sort of slipped into a kind of reverie, and as I stood there, I experienced the world only as a veil. It was a veil, like a shimmering veil. And I could see that what it veiled, but what penetrated it was this deep mystery. So again, it was almost like another reiteration of my early childhood dream in a way, I suppose. I haven't thought that till just now, but yeah, I could see that it was this multicolored veil and this deeper, it was for the purposes for this other deeper invisible mystery to come through it. And then later, that same time I was there, this is amazing. I went with a friend. She and I went down to the Dead Sea, and we were swimming in the Dead. Well, you can't swim in the Dead Sea because it's all salt. You can only float in it on your back, because if you go on your front, you can't swim. You're totally on the surface, basically. Anyway, we were in the Dead Sea, and on our backs floating. And I looked up and I saw the caves, and I said to myself, I've lived here before. I know I've lived here before. Now, those were the Qumran caves. The Qumran caves were where all the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And the Qumran caves were also the place where one of the mystical schools of mysticism in before so-called Christianity, it's where people would go to mystery school. There was another one at Mount Carmel that I've learned of subsequently, where Jesus and Mary Magdalene did their initiations. So I knew that I had lived there in those caves at some point. But I didn't know any of that. I didn't know. I mean, I don't even know if Dead Sea Scrolls had come out at that time. They might have done just. But anyway, it was the places of the earliest seen Christian communities, pre-Christian. And Jesus and Mary Magdalene actually split off from that group and went to Mount Carmel because they felt that there wasn't enough embodiment of the spirit. And that's what they were into, as I subsequently learned in spades, actually. But anyway, so that was the first experience of knowing that reincarnation is true and knowing that I had a quote unquote past life. I don't actually think in terms of past lives now. I think they're actually, because in the quantum field there's no time or space, so I think actually they're all happening at the same time. But anyway, I want to be mindful of the time. How are we doing?
We have time. Yeah, please.
Okay. 23 years later, I had the following dream. So this in 1992. And I had a dream in which I was studying the Gospel of St. John. Now, I should perhaps mention that experience, those two particular experiences in Israel, actually inspired me. I was going to read law at university, and I changed it to theology. And during my first year, we had to learn Greek. And during my first year at university, we were studying St. John's. It's one of the Gospels in the New Testament, for people who might not be familiar with that. We were studying St. John's Gospel in Greek. Now, that happened to be a gospel that really moved me. And it moved me, not like the other three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because of its deep mysticism. and symbolism. And that touched me. Now, I didn't know really what I was experiencing particularly, but I'm not sure I understood really anything properly about it, except very intuitively. But it moved me. I really was taken with it. Well, 23 years later, I have this dream. And, you know, long story short, theology wasn't for me. It was too much dogma and philosophy and all of that. I wanted to learn about mysticism. And I said, why aren't we learning about mysticism? And they just laughed at me. They thought that was weird. So, anyway, I wanted to learn about the mystics. So, of course, I had to read those on my own, which was fine and very helpful. But in this dream, I'm again, so this is now 23 years later in 92, March 92. In this dream, I'm again studying the Gospel of St. John. And I'm with a group, and we're trying to penetrate its mystery. It's like that feeling I had when I was at university, but now in the dream we were doing it. And I wanted to get down underneath it and really understand it. And in the dream, the rest of the group moves on, but I stay there as if I'm trying to get to that esoteric level, because I knew in my bones that underneath this text, there was another more original text. I just knew that in the dream. So again, it was this sort of feeling I had. It wasn't resolved in the dream, but I just knew it. Is that, you know, that feeling when you know something. So, and also it inspired me. Just it was another stage where I just wanted to learn so much, and that's when I started my PhD studies. And at the same time, because they were recently published or somewhat recently published, I started reading. It had nothing to do with my PhD studies, but I started to read the so-called Nag Hammadi texts, which are all the Gnostic texts of early Christianity, which offer a very, very different picture than how Jesus and disciples and the women in his entourage and everything were portrayed. As we all know, Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, and I mean, it's just so awful. It's only in the late 60s, I think, that the Pope apologized for that characterization of her. It's amazing. Anyway, there were a lot of women too, Elaine Pagels, a lot of feminist theologians who were writing about Mary Magdalene too at that time. Karen King, Eve Lelou, Cynthia Bourgeot, you know, many, many resources. But they were using, so there was a Gnostic text that was a very fragmentary text belonging to Mary Magdalene. But then something amazing happened in 2010. So here we are leaping ahead again, another 20 or so years. And that was the publication in 2010, 11, somewhere in there, of a book called The Gospel of the Beloved Companion, the true gospel of Mary Magdalene. Now, this is the full gospel that Mary Magdalene wrote from the 1st century, that has been held by a tradition that has protected it and kept it secret and silent for these many 2,000 years. And it's just been, well, just now it's 20 some odd years, but I mean 10, 13 years, but this is the full gospel of Mary Magdalene. And when that was published, I didn't actually come across it till about 15 or 16. When I read it and I saw it and I read it, I knew that that was the gospel beneath the gospel that I had experienced in my dream. So, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is, in this example, is that the reason dreams are so important and knowing things is so important, in addition to all the rational thinking we have to do to get along in the world, is because your dreams are on a different timeline. They're on a different timeline, and they don't ever forget you, you know. So it may be these 20 years between this or 10 years between that, but there's a thread. So when you look back, you see the thread. You know, when you look back, you see this remarkable thread of how your dreams and visions and experiences are on a trajectory. I can't even say the word trajectory, that has to do with your destiny, you know. And this is very much part of the shamanic tradition, the importance of dreams and visioning, because indeed it does. But we're not taught this when we grow up. We're not taught this at school or in university or anywhere. You kind of fall across it if you're lucky, you know. So it's like the Palestine experience and the dream of 92. And then I had another visionary dream in 2016 that had to do with the chalice of the Grail, which is very much connected with France and Europe as well. And that dream was the one that you mentioned, that I live in Southwest France. That dream led to dialogues with Mary Magdalene and teachings. And she told me to follow the blue rose. She said, follow the path. That was the first thing she said. She appeared, said, follow the blue rose, and disappeared. And I had no idea what she was talking about. So we had further dialogues, but there was a tremendous emphasis on me creating what I thought it meant. So now, several years later, I can see now it's a path that you follow because you're true to your inner spiritual illuminations and intuitions and dreams. And just the other day, I came across an alchemical text. I've never seen this before in all my readings of alchemy over the years. A picture of a blue rose. And on the side, it's, I think, from the 16th century or something. I can't quite remember. On the side, it says, the blue rose doesn't often appear in alchemy, like the colors of red, white, and black. Black, white, and red is really the order it goes in. But anyway, that's another topic. But the blue rose, so on this picture, there was it was coming out of the snake that has its mouth and its tail. And there was a stem, and there was a red rose and a white rose on the side, and a blue rose in the middle. And it said, the text said, the blue rose doesn't have its own sort of color in alchemy, but it is the flower of wisdom, Flos sapientium, the flower of wisdom. I thought that was so beautiful. So it's like linking up with what I was told. And there are some things, one or two things on the internet that has to do with the blue rose that didn't hit me as being authentic at all. Not authentic to me, I should say, not somebody else. So I knew I had to discover it and make it up for myself. And then when I saw that the other day, it was just mind-blowing. I couldn't believe it. It was just extraordinary. And then it said something like, it's the flower that leads you to arcane knowledge and illumination, or something like that. So it's high spiritual knowledge. And I thought, okay, I'm 71. My life has been on this path, slowly but surely, heading in the direction of truly trying to discover what wisdom is all about, because wisdom is what we need on our planet. Yeah. We need wisdom. And, you know, Sophia, wisdom is the dark goddess too. Wisdom is, in the Old Testament, it says something like, in the wisdom literature, something like, wisdom says, don't despise me because I'm black. But black, the shaman, is the one who closes her eyes to enter the darkness to discover the wisdom. So the Black Madonnas are all about the instinctual wisdom, the earth wisdom, the star wisdom. And that's why Mary Magdalene is probably so connected to, to the Black Madonna. Also another topic. Anyway,
Wow, that's wonderful.
Say all of
Wow.
this led to
Thank
living here.
you. Thank you for sharing all your, beautiful experiences and really profound. Thank you. It's very generous of you to share the teaching also that came out of it.
Yeah, there were so many teachings. I mean, this was such a lovely opportunity in a way to gather some of these things together, because I could see, wow, the thread of teaching of a shamanic nature. I don't call myself a shaman. Wouldn't dream of doing that, but I share qualities of of the shamanic tradition for sure, and I've learned tremendously from it as well, as I did with my pilgrimage walks, which is another way of honoring and connecting, to the earth. That's what happened. I had a profound experience on those walks of the light of nature. The used to be called in ancient times the anima mundi, the soul of the world. That's the invisible, subtle energy that links psyche and matter together.
Yeah.
So these practices, these shamanic practices, they teach us, nature teaches us. The star people teach us, our dreams teach us, our therapists can teach us, of course. I'm not one of those people that think you can bypass your psychological issues and just go to spiritual ones. You have to deal with that. Because the shaman is the wounded healer also. If you work with your own wounds, then you heal because you know what it's like for the suffering person in front of you. That's really important as well.
Absolutely.
But just quickly, because I'm sure it's time for me to summarize.
You're good. It's fascinating. Please.
So my experience, my solo walking, which is quite an amazing thing, that came out of a dream too, of a serpent who was on my arm and staring me in the face, and I was kind of scared. So I was very, you're fearful, you contract. And it was sort of saying, if you relax, you need to relax. And I thought, yeah, but you're staring me right in my face, I'm a bit alarmed, as you do with snake dreams. But it was trying to convey, no, relax. And so I thought, okay, relax. So this is in the dream. So I'm relaxing, trying to relax. As I relax, this space opens up between the snake and me. And what the snake is showing is like all these secrets of creation. And I'm getting a glimpse. And that dream, for some reason, made me really, truly realize that the snake, the serpent wisdom, has a lot to do with the body. The Kundalini energy in the body, the energy in the body. And so I knew that I couldn't just, with that dream, for example, just write it in my journal and do the usual thing. Of course, all of that I did, and it's very important, but I knew I had to get my body out on the earth. And so that's when I decided to do these walks, which I started over a 2-month period when my husband and I were in Provence, just east of Aix. I can't remember the name of the town. I think it's Vauvenargues, but I'm not sure. Just on the north side of Mont Saint-Victoire. And so I walked there, I think almost every day for about 2 months. And it was those walks that pushed me on to doing the so-called Le Puy route, which is one that goes from Le Puy-en-Velay to Conques. It's kind of, not sure it's the middle of France, but it's absolutely very old and beautiful pilgrimage path. But the times on Mont Saint-Victoire really taught me about the spirit in nature, because after 2 months, just before I was leaving to go on this Le Puy walk, I really felt sad about leaving the mountain, and I knew I'd made a connection with it, you know, and it was very hot and still, and I was just sort of expressing my feelings to the mountain, saying, I'm sorry to go, you know, you've been here, you know, I've been walking on you, we've made a connection. And suddenly, you know, out of nowhere, this beautiful big wind just went and disappeared. And it was just, you know, another of those magic moments where you just know you've been heard and you know you've been responded to. And those are the great treasures of the soul, those moments, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people who might be listening can relate to everything I'm saying. Everybody has had their version of these things, you know. There's nothing unique about any of this. But you know, it's only, for me anyway, in my life, that in recent years I felt I could even be more open about it and talk about it. And now I know how important it is, because people like to hear stories, and that's part of shamanism, storytelling. You tell your story. It's part of the art of pilgrimage, which I did as a meditation for the earth. It wasn't anything to do with anything orthodox religion or anything. Because of all the climate crises. That's why I did it. And because it was practical, I could do it. And I was getting overwhelmed with all the science and how dreadful and everything's going to end, you know. Perhaps it will, but, you know, energy only transforms. It doesn't go away. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We're in the present moment. We have to live in the present moment. That's what matters. That's the only reality. And so anyway, I did, from that walk, I did a lot of dialoguing with rocks and trees, and, you know, the atmospheres in forests, you know, a beech forest would be different from a pine forest, and, you know, the way trees congregated together and things like that in families. I mean, it was just extraordinary when you just, and walking day after day, when you're doing, I don't know, 20, 30 kilometers a day, what's that, 18, 20, I don't know, miles or something. You don't just do a hike and then rest for the weekend. You get up and you do it again, you know. So what I found was that slowly my whole ego mind, all the concerns I was carrying with me, just completely dissolved and disappeared. And yeah, you feel the energy of this Anima Mundi energy, and the beauty of it, and the beauty of our world and our planet, and all your concerns just fly out the window. And the major teaching I think I got on that walk was that the earth truly wants to be loved. She doesn't want to be fretted over with all this doomsday business about how it's all going to end. I'm sure the science is accurate and it's all looking like it is, but there's another side, and my experience of the other side is that the earth wants to be loved. And in shamanistic cultures and indigenous cultures, there are rituals constantly and always honoring the earth, our mother, the earth, our true mother, who gives us true life. Yeah, so that walk took me to these subtle planes, these in-between worlds, while you've got your feet on the ground going like this, you know, day after day, up mountains, down. I have a very strong Artemis nature, so these things I love anyway, but yeah, this taught me about the depths of the world, you know, the spirit of nature, the soul of nature, as a reality, not some idea that's, you know, came from somewhere, but truly as a reality. So I think about that almost every day I walk, and I think, no, the earth wants to be loved. The earth wants to be loved. And then I'm sure I need to be summing up. I just want to mention more recently, just to bring in another shamanic theme, that when I went to Egypt in the autumn of 21 for two months, I was mainly at the Temple of Abydos. There's a reason why that was so. But I went there for 2 months. I'd been there in 2010, had an experience there with Isis in the small chapel there, where I was enveloped in a kind of sort of cosmic love in the very small chapel that there is to her there, in addition to the big one, but this was the small one. Just extraordinary. The beauty and unconditional presence blew me over, and I knew that I would return. And so last autumn, or 21, I went to work with an indigenous wisdom keeper in the ancient Egyptian tradition. And so that was a huge descent, that was, which is also part of the shamanic tradition. And of course he was a shaman as well, where you do, this thorough examination that really takes you down. It took me down anyway. You do various practices, ceremonies, dialoguing, visioning, massages, sound treatments. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And we went to a couple of other temple sites, but not very many, because mostly we were there for that time. And so it was kind of dismantling of whatever needed to be looked at and needed to be reevaluated, because part of the reason I went was, okay, I'm 70. I want to know what my destiny, what my calling, what am I supposed to be doing now? That kind of question. And so it was a profound death experience. For about a week, I actually did feel like catatonic almost. Couldn't move, lost a lot of weight. I thought I had COVID or something. Of course, no one believes in COVID in Egypt, so no one really has it. No one wore masks. I mean, you felt idiot, arriving on an airplane with a mask on. No one wears them. They have a totally different attitude about COVID. Anyway, I didn't have it. I thought, I must have COVID. And they said, no, you don't. No, he kept saying that Horace, my teacher, no, you don't. It's just part of your process. And I said, no, I'm sure I've got COVID. And they said, if you insist on doing a test, okay, So I did the test. That you haven't got COVID. Okay. It's pretty funny, actually. Anyway, very profound, very, 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 very deep. And then gradually, because I was there for 2 months, gradually the energy returned. There were things we did that helped that. And then gradually I just started getting interested more. It just came spontaneously. I didn't even really know I was doing it till Horace reflected it back. But I started to talk more philosophically about the world and the galaxies and our planet and the universe and the star people and all of this. And what I discovered was that in the temples, have you been to Egypt?
Not yet.
No, you have to, because it's just will blow your mind, and it's just not understandable what's going on there, past and present now, because they all seem to be waking up again, these temples. But they encode cosmic knowledge. That's what they do. And Horace kept saying, walk, because we went to the temple, this beautiful temple of Abydos, so pretty much every day. He would say, you don't have to understand all the hieroglyphs. Just know you're being beamed and you're being taught, and it'll unfold gradually. And so one of the images on the wall in the Abydos temple is of Ibis, the bird-headed god. And he always, or very often, is shown with his companion, Shishat, who's a goddess, who has a 7-pointed star on her head, always that's her signature, if you like. And she holds a pen. So, but Thoth is the god who knows the cosmic secrets, knows the magic, knows, he's also known as, Mercurius and Hermes, gradually through European traditions, but Shishat is his companion, who is an astrologer and many other things, but she is the one who writes it all down. And so I think there's something about that, finding a way to talk about some of these broader issues. And I think there's something about that that'll unfold in the next few years for me. I'm not sure, I don't know exactly. But I think it's along the lines of needing a larger vision on our planet. And because we obviously, what we're doing now is simply not working, obviously it's not working. We need another vision for our world. And of course, there are many people working on this and learning about it. But I think there is something for me, given the experiences I've had, about the ways that we connect to the earth and the stars and in between, that has to do with what many people like yourself, and I'm no doubt people watching, will be interested in, which is this movement toward a much greater multidimensional consciousness. And this is what physicists are talking about as well.
And yes, it's also, I mean, it's wonderful, and I thank you for sharing your all the teaching you have received yourself, and all the physical and spiritual wisdom you have channeled. But there is something that I would really like to ask you, and it is about how do you explain that shamanism, mysticism, and also Jung's their psychology overlap, because you have an expertise in that. So I'm very curious to know about that.
Yes. So, I just want to say that I do think this is such a beautiful summit that you're putting on here, because it will make these practices and traditions widely available, and people do need to know more about it, because I think shamanism represents this longing in our souls, and it's a longing for an awakening to spiritual and soulful realities, and this renewal of this multidimensional consciousness, long since lost in these secular times. And these experiences that were once part of the culture with the Eleusinian mysteries and the Isis mystery traditions, what you learn through them is that you have a sense of something in you that's immortal. It's like an inner secret, which lessens the fear of death and makes life more vital, more joyful, more instinctual, and inspires one to create and recreate, because sometimes you have to do this many times, your world in the deepest sense. And as you experience these symbolic death and rebirths, they lead to invisible realities and powers. And so shamanic experiences are completely akin to mystical ones, because they share the same quality of direct experience of numinous, spiritual, and deeply challenging realities of the dark nights of the soul, which lead to renewal. And such experiences are the wellspring of esoteric wisdom. It helps the rational to become more subservient to the contemplative, and it gives, it helps us do this shutting of the eyes to enter the dark, because in the dark, we find the deeper wisdom of the heart and the broad expanse of worlds within that we get glimpses of in our dreams and visions. And I would say that Carl Jung's psychology, certainly his own experiences, are both shamanistic and mystical, as well as scientific. as well as scientific. And if you read his Red Book, which was only published in the late, I think, 2009, that's the account of his journals. And you can go online now and look at the Red Book if you don't know about it, because it's an account of his visionary experiences. It came out of a creative illness early on in his career. He'd had a break with Freud. It was World War I. He lost his Christian faith. And he went into this really deep descent for about 5 or 6 years. But in the recording, in the Red Book of his experiences, and also in his visionary autobiography called Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, you see the influence of how creative illness leads to the spirit of the depths, to otherworld journeys, to encounters with the guides. His was called Philemon, a great big winged guide who taught him, as he says, the reality of the other world. So through these torments and blessings and encounters, he forged his own psychology. He says that. He says, and this is a quote, just find it here. He says, out of this early period of disorientation, as he calls it, he discovered his vocation. His vocation, that's where it came from. His life calling, his myth, as he calls it. He writes, "It was then that I dedicated myself to the service of the psyche." Now, I would say service of the soul. He says, "I loved it and hated it, but it was my greatest wealth." And then he goes on to say, it was the way that he found to live life as fully as possible. Now, I think that's a great summary of the origin of his work and his work. Now, a lot of it's become very clinical today, but my Jung is the mystical Jung. My Jung, everyone has their Jung, has their, whatever their main teacher was, their version of it, right? My Jung is the mystic, and unapologetically so. And yes, he wrote it down as science, but the living reality of the soul, of the psyche, includes all these mystical shamanic experiences. And as many people know who've entered psychoanalysis or therapy, we learn that the most devastating sorts of experience in life, loss, illness, divorce, death of a loved one, all of that can lead to a calling on another level of being. And he uses, one of the major metaphors that he uses in his psychology is that of alchemy, because alchemy is the art of transformation and transmutation. And that's when your body changes because you're changing, not just your insights. Insights is the easy bit. It's change that really is hard for people. As we all know, we hold on to the old, because of fear and all the understandable things that we go through before we can move forward. It's totally normal. And in this, in the metaphor of alchemy, it's you discern all the opposites and they come together in a new formulation, sometimes called the sacred marriage. And that's the union of opposites on another level. It's where you've integrated your dark side and your light side, and you've been able to transmute those energies such that you're connected to your instincts, but you have your visions too, but you've firmly got 2 feet on the ground, And he says, in the end, the only events of my life worth telling are those when the imperishable world erupted into this transitory one. That is why I speak, he writes, this is in his autobiography, chiefly of inner experiences, among which I include my visions and dreams. These form the prima materia, the basis, the substance of my scientific work. They were the fiery magma. Now that gives you a sense of what an ordeal sometimes these descents can be. out of which the stone that had to be worked was crystallized. The stone is the philosopher's stone. The stone is the eternal one that through our effort, through our willingness to suffer our own losses, griefs, all of that, we build, our conflicts are, we build a subtle body. This is what you take with you when you move on to the next adventure called death, but I'm sure it's going to be amazing. So dreams and visions and supernormal events are the main guiding force for shamans and mystics. Then we can make the inner outer, as it were. Once you've done your inner work, then you can share it with others, and however doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be fancy, whatever is truly you in your heart, then you can share that. And you do it with authority because you have suffered it and you know it, and you've had those joys and those disappointments. And the other thing I want to mention about Jung, and I'll just move on to a concluding paragraph, is that he did these amazing shamanic paintings. And if you just go online and look at Red Book paintings, you can see they are absolutely unbelievable. And I'm sure he did this as a ritual practice, which he continued to encourage his patients to do too, to concretize, so that you've actually got something, physical that represents and embodies your experience. So shamans, as we know, from cave walls in Southwest France to the current time, always done these amazingly transpersonal paintings. And we see them on Egyptian temple walls and on their sarcophagi and, all of this in the burial chambers. The pre-dynastic Egyptians who were shamanic, mystical, came from Lemuria and Atlantis, and then Egypt, and then a lot of the sacred centers around the world. So just to summarize, the shaman or shamaness or mystic is one who out of her own creative illness has become a wounded healer, a priest, priestess, magician, artist, visionary, mystic, teacher, dream worker, ceremonialist. She closes her eyes to see in the dark the truth and gain access to wisdom from different levels of consciousness. She assists us in entering the portals of our own depths and darkness to find our own calling, discover our guides, spiritual guides, animal guides, bird guides, whatever, to work with our dreams, to open the visionary imagination, and to be present in non-ordinary encounter experiences. So the shaman also helps link us to our star heritage if we don't instinctively know that already, supporting journeys to sacred sites, or simply being in and honoring nature and telling stories and our story. And this is always of discovering between our place, as it were, between earth and sky, and becoming a wounded healer ourselves, so that we may become a shining one and a walking star.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And then you tell the community. That's the fourth stage of pilgrimage. I didn't read about pilgrimage till I did it. And then afterwards, on the way, I realized, okay, you get a call, you're called into a landscape, you go through the experiences, and then you come back and you have to tell your story to the community. That's your job. So
yeah,
other people can learn from you. That's why.
Thank you so much.
Spread the love, they say.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all this with all of us, and it's very meaningful, and I'm sure it will help all of us to deepen our own practice and our awakening to being again a clearer channel to receive all those messages. So thank you so much. And it was very profound, and thank you again for taking all your time to explain to us all the teaching you've received and the one you've shared. And to finish
So
your,
welcome.
oh, please. And it's not finished because you have 2 gifts for our audience. So 2 papers that will be posted on your website if you want to share.
Yeah, so if you go to my site, which egregiously, I'm afraid, is terribly out of date, but I'm
The process of revamping. Great.
I haven't got to it yet, but this year I tell myself I will. I'm hoping to anyway. But if you go to the homepage, I guess they call it, and scroll down, there's something called recent posts. Well, actually, they're not so recent. Well, there's one on Mary Magdalene. So there's one called, I think it's called Mary Magdalene and the Mysteries.
And
The Mysteries of Mary Magdalene and the Blue Rose Path. That's what it's called. I could add to that now, actually, since I discovered that alchemical picture, or it found me.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
So there's that one. There's one on sacred bees. I can't remember if I said that I don't think I did mention it, but the first walk I did on a solo pilgrimage walk I got connected to bees, and I got symbolically connected to bees, and I got very drawn to something called the Path of Pollen, which is an indigenous, ancient indigenous Eastern European tradition that is based in the bee, the wisdom of the bee. And it's an oracular tradition. And so that's a paper on bees, on sacred bees. So I was an apprentice in that for 2 years. And so I learned a lot about the oracular tradition and the symbolism of the bee, which is absolutely fascinating. If you go to a site called sacredtrust.com, you can read about it.
Great, thank you.
So that's that one. And then I just asked my web mistress to put up a talk that I gave about a year ago on Egypt. It was the first talk I gave after I came back from Egypt. And so I'm going to put that talk up there too. So
wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us.
There's 1 or 2 others, but I thought those would be of main interest maybe to people watching this program. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Appreciate your generosity. Thank you so much. And is there anything you would like to say to close our interview? Anything you would like to share, the final word for today?
Well, just blessings on your path. I mean, it's really hard for people, particularly at the moment. And it's not easy to make these kinds of inner journeys. And I just want to that the gifts, the boons are worth it. And that's not really why you go. You usually go into it because you can't help it. There's nowhere else to go, kind of thing. But just to honor your suffering, and if that's where you are, and to know that by taking the time to delve into your own issues, you will gain in depth and wisdom and substance, and you will become the healer, or whatever aspect of shamanism appeals to you. It could be just parts of it or just one thing. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever is you and in your heart, and trust that as much as you can.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your wise word and messages. Thank you so much. Again, it was an honor to host you today. And thank you for everyone watching us today. Thank you so much, Veronica. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Celine. It was an absolute pleasure, really. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.